Good evening to everyone. My head is a little bit cut off there, sir. What's up with that? For those that are tuning in, welcome to Cushing Indian Baptist Church. I believe we have crossed the little threshold. So all of our live videos will now be ending after, or they'll be taken down after 30 days, but you can still find them on YouTube. If you want to subscribe, jump over there. To me, because it's built for video, it's a little bit better. We don't usually monitor the YouTube chat. It's enabled over there. We just don't monitor it. I guess we'll have to switch over at some point and monitor them all. But we are going to continue our study that we have for the springtime here. We are in session 7 if you have your little quarterlies, or we're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 4 for those of you all following along in the Bible. Again, I'm reading out of the Christian Standard Version. Again, the Bible study author has us the way he framed this question, I'm not going to use the exact wording of what he used because it's kind of weird, but it's a good question. He said, what kind of organizer are you when it comes to getting ready for vacations or just any trip? What kind of organizer are you? And we'll let anybody answer. More pertaining to adults because we have to get around and all that type of stuff. But hey, some of the boys have to do stuff too. What kind of organizer are you guys? Are you kids? Are you a good organizer? Bad organizer? Mid. I love what is that? Gen Alpha? What's his generation? Is it Gen Alpha? But Gen something. I love their the way they're I love y'all's terminology and your guys' phrases and stuff that you guys are coming up with. Mid means like regular. Yeah, it's the middle. So both y'all are Gen Z. So we're the cutoff's right there, but you guys are. Buh. Anyways, I know. So okay, what kind of organizer? So we hired mid, bad. What kind of organizer are you?
Now it's just like template, so it's like I know what to get. Like if you talk about going on vacation, like what to pack.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of know what to pack now, and then I just let Nicole do the rest, and then I load it up. So I know basically I plan for the days. I think something chilling, something nice, and sleep. All my bathroom stuff: shampoo, deodorant, medicines, toothbrush,
Okay.
and then like your shoes. You gotta have shoes that you
Is it important to pack?
Yeah. You can't just grab random stuff. You gotta, and then always pack extra because you never know.
Okay, so when do you start?
The morning of, brother. No, well, I've gotten better at that. Kind of like a day, or like a little bit prior to, and then
What's a little bit? 5 minutes?
yeah, probably about like 5 minutes the day, like 2 days before, the day before, and then like that next day, you just like if we're leaving at 2, we're leaving at like 8. Packing a few hours before we head out, and then we're loading up the cargo.
What about you, Ken? Just grab your stuff and go. What's this? This is just vacation. What about Sunday school? What about coming to church? Because I got griped out earlier. We was sitting in the car when we got here, and my wife was asking, "Where's my bag?" And there's a church bag that comes to church with us, and it's always with us. It's always in my car or the car that we take here, right? Well, I use my car for other things, and I don't usually like to keep it in there, so I'll take it out. It didn't make it back in there tonight, so the church bag isn't in there. But we didn't realize that until we got here, right? And if you're not organized, if you're not doing these organization things for any trip, right, you might be unprepared. Um, the Bible study author wants to redirect us. It says, why does it matter that believers have everything they need to grow in spiritual maturity? What's one of the things you need at church? It's pretty simple. Yeah. Why do you need a Bible? Yeah, to follow along, to read for yourself while the preacher or teacher or whoever is reciting the passages. You can read along, and then you can follow along as they're going, right? Or say something catches your attention in a passage, right? You might be doing some Bible study. You might be in a Bible study like tonight, but you want to keep on reading, right? You want to read the context around it. It's important for you to grow spiritually so that you can understand what God is trying to show you. It says packing for a trip reveals something about a person's personality. Some start packing weeks in advance. I know this to be true for some of my people because they'll actually look at things they need for that trip, right? We was thinking about going on a trip, on an extended trip, and one of the things that the search history reveals was neck pillows, because they had neck pillows beforehand. They really, really needed them on this trip way long time ago, and they was wanting to try to get that. So they're trying to already organize and get those items around so that they can have it when we go, right? While others pack the morning they leave, much like what brother was talking about here. Give me a few minutes and we'll get everything around. That's how I am with some of these trips that I take pretty regularly. It costs me a lot. I'm not going to testify here about it, but everybody knows what's going on here. But I did not check my bags. You guys online can probably go and just search what if you forget a certain item in your carry-on luggage and you try to make it through TSA, what will happen? And I don't have privileges now that I spent a lot of money and a lot of time on to get. I don't have those privileges anymore because I didn't take the time beforehand to properly pack my materials and go on this trip. And it was literally like, I don't have to fly to where I'm flying, but it's a lot more convenient, a lot more efficient, and I don't have to be on the road at busy times, rush hour traffic each way. And so it's really, really convenient, but I made it a lot more inconvenient for myself because I didn't pack. I didn't take the proper amount of time to pack beforehand. Some put everything they could possibly need in their luggage. Women, I'll say it, women are notorious about this, right? They'll pack for like a 28-day trip when they're only going to be gone 2 days because they don't know what they're going to need while they're on that trip. Us guys might be the opposite. We are going to go on a month-long vacation, a 2-week cruise, but we have just a carry-on because that's all we need. Not thinking about what we might need in different situations, like brother was explaining, the different time periods throughout the day that we need to be able to relax or be in a business suit or whatever. We got our stuff and we're good. Let's head out. Others only take the bare essentials. Still others buy items they need once they arrive at their destination. This is real convenient when you're talking about flying on an airplane, or because the stuff you need while you're on the trip might not be acceptable through security, right? Or you might have to send things ahead. I remember when we went out to the mission trip in Hawaii, we wanted to feed. We wanted to do a lot of cultural stuff, but we needed stuff from here. And the way we got that was we mailed it ahead of time. And by the time it got out there, right, we were out there and we were able to take advantage of it. Like, it's weird the way shipping works for cargo or whatever. But we couldn't carry all that stuff with us. We were talking about taking the big drum. We had to end up just using a little hand drum while we were out there. And that's the reason why, is because you're not able to do some of this stuff that you want to do and take everything that you need. Believers are equipped with everything they need to grow in spiritual maturity and battle sin in their lives. So we're talking about that organization and getting everything that we need to be able to serve the Lord. That's what the Bible study authors wants us to focus on. It says, you've likely heard it said that how something is communicated is just as important as what is communicated. Peter likely agreed. The passage we're going to read contains commands, warnings, and encouragements, but the content is all centered around one thing: how to live as a Christian in the era between Jesus' resurrection and return, right? We just celebrated Easter. When he became alive, right? He was buried away, put in the tomb, but the stone was rolled away. He met the disciples later on. That time period all the way up until when he comes back, which is what we're living in today. There's a commandment to live for God's will. There's a warning that doing so would lead to oppression. There is encouragement to take an eternal view of such suffering. Sometimes we need to be told bluntly what to do. Sometimes we need to be warned. Sometimes we need to be encouraged. And Peter does it all in this passage. So starting in verse 1 of chapter 4, 1 Peter, it says, therefore, since Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same understanding, because the one who suffers in the flesh is finished with sin, in order to live the remaining time in the flesh no longer for human desires, but for God's will. For there has already been enough time spent in doing what the Gentiles choose to do, carrying on in unrestrained behavior, evil desires, drunkenness, carousing, and lawless idolatry. There's also a part there, it's probably not PG right there. It says orgies, and we know what those are as adults, but that's what it's talking about, is that careless living. It says, at the end of chapter 3, Peter emphasized that suffering for Christ was a blessing, not a curse. It was a pathway to spiritual growth and maturity for a believer. Ultimately, it would result in victory and exaltation, just as it did with Christ himself. From there, Paul used therefore as a bridge to application, because what he said about suffering in chapter 3 was true. The readers in Asia Minor could trust what he was getting ready to share in chapter 4. Arm yourselves carries a military connotation. When you teach U.S. history, you taught the Declaration of Independence and the no, you didn't. Did you teach any of that? Or social studies? Oh, okay. So you didn't. Well, somebody was having to study that.
Probably eighth grade history.
Anyways, in the Second Amendment, it says that we can. Citizens are guaranteed a right to bear arms, and I always think it's funny because some comics and there's a certain cartoon out there that exaggerates that and says, how could we ever misinterpret that everybody has a right to bear arms? And they literally holding two bear arms, like big grizzly bear arms with the claws and everything. But it's arms, when there's a call to arms, right? It's a militaristic type of call. It's thinking about army. It's thinking about arming yourselves with weapons to be able to go to battle, to go to war. That's what you get issued when you enlist in the army. Is you get a primary weapon, and if you qualify, you can get a secondary weapon as well. That's the mentality here that you should be looking at when you're talking, when you read that, arm yourselves. But we're not talking about weapons that are physical here. We're talking about weapons that are going to do spiritual battle. It suggests that soldiers prepare themselves on making sure they are fully equipped for the battle. Spiritually, a proper attitude towards suffering is a key weapon in a believer's arsenal. Since suffering is a matter of when and not if, we must understand and adopt the attitude of Christ towards suffering. The attitude of Christ towards suffering, which could produce more suffering as a result. One one of the things that you are trained to do in the military is that you train for battle. That's expected of you, so that when you go to war, when you actually have to go and fight enemy forces, that you're not caught off guard. There might still be some surprising things, some surprising elements about battle, but it's so that you're ready to enter that conflict. The same way that Peter is talking about Christians is the same way we should practice that same mentality, right? It's not that we're not gonna. It's actually what Bible study author phrased it really, really good. It's not if, it's when that stuff is when it's gonna happen. We're gonna suffer. Christians are gonna suffer, and to prepare ourselves, what it will help us is to overcome that suffering, right? That spiritual mindset. The strength required to embrace suffering as a necessary blessing is perhaps a bit easier to muster when we realize that our suffering is evidence that we are reborn and walk in a new life apart from sin. The one who suffers in the flesh for Christ proves to themselves and to the world that they've truly chosen a new life that is markedly different from others. This also encourages other Christians. One of the things that we get to see when we have our church family and we're doing some of these things, right? We might see others taking on those battles. And somebody was saying is, man, we're amazed at the strength of their faith, the power of their faith to be able to continue on. That is an encouragement to us that are watching. That's the testimony that they can provide to be able to show that God is real, that God, not only was he telling the truth that people are going to suffer, but that there is a better end at the end of the road. Logic alone could have led Peter to surmise the same of his readers would certainly pass to surmise that some of his readers would certainly pass away before Jesus returned, perhaps even due to the suffering and persecution they were enduring. While first century believers looked to Jesus' return with the expectation, they also lived with the awareness that they might die before he came back. With that in mind, Peter emphasized that whatever time God grants his people on earth should be lived for his glory, not only in the variety of ways that unbelievers do, not only in the ways that unbelievers do. God's people should be dedicated to him. That requires rejecting their old ways of life, the human desires that once dominated their actions and attitudes. Living according to the will of God looks vastly different than living according to the world's agenda. And then it goes on to describe that stuff. But this was always like visiting certain cities, especially one of the taboo things of the world, and especially as believers, is Las Vegas, because there's so much that goes on there. In fact, it's probably getting worse. I was sharing with people a few years ago. They was entertaining passing the I can't remember what it was called, but basically to allow recreational consumption of a certain substance that's only medicinally available here in Oklahoma. And apparently Oklahoma's trying to get that on the ballot too. But it would have been restrained, right? Okay, so you think about this. You allow certain things to happen, you're only going to control it to a certain point. And if the law enforcement was to cite everybody that was partaking out there right now, they'd probably be buried in paperwork because it's rampant. The last time I went out there, it's like it's in the air. It's just that bad. That's what they're talking about here when Peter is talking about everyone else is choosing to live like that. And it's okay. It's accepted. That's one of the things that the world allows. But to live for God, it's not that you're not enjoying those things. It's not that you can partake and be okay. It's that you're actively living against God, and that's going to be oppressed, because what he says here and continuing on in verse 4 is going to be that, you know what, you're not accepted. You're going against the grain. And continuing on in verse 4, right? It says, they are surprised that you don't join them in the same flood of wild living, and they slander you. They will give an account to the one who stands ready to judge the living and the dead. For this reason, the gospel was also preached to those who are now dead, so that although they might be judged in the flesh according to human standards, they might live in the spirit according to God's standards. So, Gentiles found it surprising that Christians did not partake in the ruckus. I can't remember how to say that word. That crazy lifestyle. The Greek wording can refer to showing hospitality to an unexpected guest. However, in this context, the secondary rendering of the bewilderment and astonishment fits better. The Gentiles were struck by the novelty of the Christians' moral stand, right? I said this here in church, but I never thought that Oklahoma, of all of the states, would have allowed even the medicinal use of the marijuana, can't even think of what. Yeah, cannabis. That's the term I'm thinking about, right? Never in a million years. Growing up, even I knew. I've never dabbled in or anything like that, but it was just taboo. Us being one of the Bible Belt states, and when it was passed, I was like, "What in the world?" And now I guess we're the state with the most produced marijuana in the United States. It's crazy. And it is. At the end of the day, it's supposed to be, but they're not even getting any money off of it. That's a whole different deal, a whole different conversation. But it's accepted. It's accepted by the world. And that goes to show you that those that are trying to make a stand against it are going to be looked at a little bit different, because why do you care? Well, it's not right. In fact, to really understand what God is trying to do, you have to actually take a stance against certain things. You have to have standards. You have to have God's standards, not human standards. We could change our mind day to day, minute to minute, second to second. We can change it. We can be so wishy-washy on how things go. God doesn't. And to live up to his standards, right? We'll never achieve them. That's why he had to sacrifice his son on the cross, and why that all had to take place. But that's what we look forward. That's what we look up to. The pagans in Asia Minor took their cues from Rome, and the values of God's kingdom varied so greatly from that cultural standard that Christians could scarcely fit into the everyday activities of life around them. This otherness resulted in the kinds of social persecution discussed in prior chapters. While such forms of persecution might lead to something more severe, such as torture or even execution, 1 Peter implies that social persecution was the strongest and most common, right? And that even continues to today. We might be looked at odd when we say that we don't agree with a certain way of living, right? How many of us have, I wouldn't say lost friends, but have vastly different social circles when we became a believer and started following God's way than we did stop living that other way, right? It's really, really different. And the reason for that is because the world doesn't accept us anymore. That's okay, because God does. And that's what we have to focus on. And that's what Peter is trying to tell the people here in Asia Minor, but it extends to us today, is that living for God is better than living for the world. Peter already described the unrestrained parties and carousing on the part of the unbelievers. Here he returns to that negative description of the surrounding culture. The Greek word that he used suggests wastefulness and dissipation. Paul used the same term to describe drunkenness and the kind of Christian leaders the behavior Christian leaders should avoid. As noted, so picking up there on verse 4 at the end, this is, so they are surprised that they don't plunge with them into the same flood of wild living, and they slander you. Peter suggests the primary form of persecution in Asia Minor was social ostracization, and that is even the more extreme form of it is still in our tribal laws. It's called banishment. Not so much that I don't think that we wouldn't think that capital punishment, i.e. the death penalty, wouldn't be a worse fate, but being banned from your people, being thrown out of your area is probably pretty bad. I know in our culture to be ostracized was something that was on the level of being put to death. And so right here, this is what the people in that Peter's readers are primarily concerned with, is being shunned, being thrown away. The Christians were the targets of harsh words and accusations, but Peter used a word related to blasphemy here, suggesting that God was a target of their insults as well. Again, living for him, if you're being persecuted, it's not that you necessarily are the target, it's God, because you're living for him. As long as you are living for him, that's I caution that. As long as you're living for God and not living for yourself under the guise that you're living for God, then you can rest assured that you're not necessarily the one that's being persecuted. It's God that's being persecuted. It's Jesus on the cross, his empty tomb that's being persecuted. What it means, not so much that Arthur Autochthony is the one that is at our target, our crosshairs, right at the evil. As long as we're living to God's standard, or trying to achieve God's standards, I guess you could say we're getting in the way of that attack, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. We're in the right place, right, that God wants us to be. Unfortunately, what he's promised us is, and we're not living the best life ever. We're going to endure that suffering, but it's the end goal that we're trying to focus on. And what he transitions into the latter part of the first few verses here. Peter's instruction throughout his letter is grounded in his understanding of eschatology, the study of last things. As such, he reminded his readers yet again that God will have the last word with such pagans. In the short term, it might seem that the sinners are escaping judgment and thriving in their rebellion against God. In Psalm 73, an ancient worship leader named Asaph wrestled with the same issues. However, both Asaph and Peter came to understand that God works in his own timing. In the long run, those who slandered him and his people would stand before him and be forced to give an account of their words and their actions. He will judge the living and the dead, and he will make things right again. The dead to whom Peter referred are likely believers who had physically died having believed the gospel. It was common for Gentiles to argue that because a Christian had died, their faith was meaningless. Where's the similarity today, right? What's the question that people always ask? Well, what happens after you die? Where are you going to go? You're going to just decompose in the ground. That's science, right? This is what Peter was trying to tell his readers in the region that he was helping. Again, Peter was keeping his readers' eyes on eternity. What believers knew and unbelievers could not comprehend was that this world is not all there is. Those who died in Christ were and are very much alive in God's presence and awaiting the revelation of Jesus at the end of time. Again, transitioning on into the last couple of verses here. The end of all things is near. Therefore, be alert and sober-minded for prayer. Above all, maintain constant love for one another, since love covers a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without complaining. Just as each one has received a gift, use it to serve others as good stewards of the varied grace of God. If anyone speaks, let it be as one who speaks God's words. If anyone serves, let it be from the strength of that. Let it be from the strength God provides, so that God may be glorified through Jesus Christ in everything. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen. So, again, trying to wrap up this part, but focusing the sight of his readers on the end that God has already promised us, that he's already delivered on when he sent his son to die for us, right? Jesus' life, death, and resurrection inaugurated the end of all things. That the New Testament writers speak of the end of all things as happening soon say as much about their understanding of Jesus' ministry, death, and resurrection as it does about their the study of the end of things, the end of time. Knowing full well what Jesus meant, they could only speak of the end of times with the same kind of certainty and urgency. It should be emphasized that a heightened sense of urgency regarding the end of times in no way encourages speculation about when it will take place or a particular sign of Jesus' return. Again, what was said by Jesus himself. We still do not know the time or season when that is going to occur. Still, Peter encouraged a sense of urgency, encouraging believers to remain alert and to live like the one who is coming back until that day comes. The word for prayer is connected, in the Greek word is connected linguistically to both of the prior verbs, be alert and sober-minded. Believers should use their common sense when they think about how short life is and how they use the time God has given them. People who understand history can understand how important the present is. I was listening to somebody speak about how some people think about retirement and certain things, and how I guess there's this book that's on fire, caught fire in the past decade or so. It's talking about how we're raising the most the most stressed out generation that we've ever raised in lifetime. Talking about this period that where parents are like, I think probably young 30s all the way up to 50s, how they're stressed out, how they're and that flows down to their family. But it's because they think that their life is already over. And I say that because what Peter was talking about was having that same type of urgency, that there is a time when we're not going to be able to waste time, right? Where Jesus' return is imminent. Both of those ideas center around the fact that you should make the most of your time that's available. Now, the podcast people were talking about how your life isn't over after 40, after 45, or even 50. They're talking about their working life and saving for retirement, all that type of stuff. I said, you still have time. We're probably going to live. Our age expectancy has not declined. Now, for most populations, there was a blip a few years ago where there was a life expectancy that went down for a certain group of people. But as a human race, our life expectancy has been increasing for a while. And we're probably going to live pretty commonly to 100, and maybe even past that. And that's what Peter is talking about here. You should be focused on what God has given you, what he's allowed you to be able to do, right? The retirement people were talking about, well, you have still time to earn more money and to be able to take care of yourself in your retirement years. That's all centered on that Jesus will return. There's a certain gift that he's giving you, what he was referring to back in the earlier part of this passage that we're studying, and that you should use it, and that you should live for other people. What Jesus was commanding us to do: live for God, and love other people as you would love yourself. And this insight leads to dependence on God through prayer, asking God to do things and make changes while there is still time. Knowing that God is ending history should make believers trust him more, and this trust shows up in their prayers. When believers pray with focus, they admit anything good that happens is because of God's kindness. Sober-minded and prayerful people love others well. By loving others well, fielded in part by a longing for Jesus' return, we more easily forgive, which frees us to invite others into our lives, right? We're not holding grudges. We're not shunning people away the same way the world was treating Peter's readers, right? They were living different, and they were like, well, we don't want to be a part of that. What are they doing? We're going to keep on carrying on and whatever. Whereas Jesus was trying to show the opposite, right? It doesn't matter what we're doing. Hopefully we convert them and get them to see the light and to live for God rather than carrying on in the worldly living. But that doesn't mean we cut them off. In fact, our Christian selves say that our belief system says that we need to take care of those individuals. We need to reach out to them. As noted, believers receive their gift to serve others. This is good stewardship of the gift, as opposed to using the gift to gain notoriety, self-esteem, or even what is popular today, an identity, right? That's what the world is trying to sell you, is that you need to be somebody in this world and try to do all this other stuff, be famous and all that, get all the money. But when it comes down to it, what Peter was trying to show was what we try to follow in our lives as Christians today. Said Peter acknowledged that some gifts require speaking and some do not. If one had to consolidate gifts into two categories, there are two Peter would select. If one is using a speaking gift, he must speak God's word. Gospel fidelity is one speech is vital for anyone who believes he has a speaking gift. In the same way, those with serving gifts must rely on God's strength and not their own, because it takes a lot to be able to serve people, especially when they want to persecute you, when they want to say bad things about what he was talking about. They want to slander you behind your back. They want to talk about you, stir up things, right? They want to gossip. So this is a good lesson. I didn't want to skip it because it's really, really keen on focusing where we should be heading, right? That end of time mentality, that what he's promised us. We studied a little bit about it during Easter, what that meant to us, but where we are living and where we're headed. So we're going to wrap it up right there. We're going to end the online portion at this point. If you guys have any prayer requests, share with us. Just go ahead and leave a comment. We'll get to it. If it's 30 days afterwards, join our group. Leave a comment on the YouTube one. Send us an email. Send us a text. Private message us on Messenger. However you want to reach out to us, we'll get your prayer requests and we'll lift them up along with ours. So until Sunday, we'll see you later.